Good morning, everybody. Thanks very much indeed for attending. It's a very well attended event, so I'm pleased to have been invited here to talk to you today. You might have noticed from the accent that I'm from across the water. I am from BRE, and I've got a bet on with Alan that I won't mention the B word, the Brexit word, but my introduction has been spoilt if I can't, because I just wanted to point out that BRE, the first three letters of that, is not representative of Brexit. What I would say is that if you want to talk about Brexit for the next half hour, rather than modular buildings, maybe we could have a vote on that. And if we don't like the outcome, maybe we'll have another vote and see if the outcome is different. Anyway, I'm here to talk to you essentially about the standard that BRE has developed for the UK around modular building, and I will transfer between terminology of modular buildings or off-site construction, but essentially I'm talking about the same thing. It could be elements that Dag was talking about, two-dimensional elements, or it could apply equally to three-dimensional whole modules. My opening slide is quite an important one, I think, in the sense of it links into something that Sean said at the introduction, that cost is very important in modular buildings, and it's still very debatable at this stage whether conventional methods of building are cheaper or are more cost-effective. However, I'm here to put a slightly different view across to that, in as much that I was at a Construction Products Association event last year, and the president stood up and said, you've got to get the quality right, you've got to get the performance right, and if you do both of those things, then you won't have defects in the systems, you won't have defects at the installation stage, and so therefore the financial side of this will automatically fall into place. If you can proverbially plug and play your modules into the systems that they're going to be occupied in, then and in situ, then the cost effectiveness of modular off-site constructions should stack up, and I'm sorry for that bad pun. So, talk to you about the standard and what we're doing. I want to talk to you a little bit about the background, just so that you can understand where BRE comes from, what BRE does as a group, because really the modular standard fits right into that as a sort of a product, if you like, that the BRE offers. I want to put a case to you as to why do we need a standard for off-site construction, because a lot of people in the UK, for example, say, well, we've already got standards, we've already got assurance schemes. Why do we need something else? Why is this thing different, for example, that BRE is developing? And then underpinning the standard in its own right is the certification that can be offered. And I want to just sort of talk to you about that for a few slides, and to try and distinguish that this is more about a BRE type certification scheme rather than the CE marking that's sort of associated with the Brexit situation. There's another fiver. But it takes it away from the Europeanisation and makes it more of a locally implemented certification scheme or locally implemented standard. And what I would say is that this standard has been developed around the UK regulations, but again I want to sort of take you through the notion that we can take the crown off of it and make it more, put the Irish harp onto it. It's an easy way of transposing the UK regulations and making sort of in effect local Irish versions of it. So for at least the last 12 months, BRE Global Ireland has had a presence in Dublin, just at the north of the city in Glasnevin. It's part of the DCU campus, the Alpha, the Innovation Hub. So we've been ensconced in the building there. But BRE Global Ireland is part of the wider BRE group, which is based in Watford, just north of London in the UK. That's what sort of who we do, and that's what we are. But in essence, we do research, we do certification, we do testing. We're in the built environment. We do aspects of innovation, and we do whole building certifications, for example. We've got quite a history. We're nearly 100 years old. I think some of those employees are still in the establishment somewhere. I always laugh because there are videos online of people in three-piece suits doing good hard physical testing with a pipe in one hand and a a vernier caliper in the other, but they're wearing not a laboratory coat but a three-piece suit and a tie, all very sort of traditional stuff. We've got a presence around the world really through different mechanisms. We have the BREEAM whole building assessment methodology. We have local offices in countries around the world, least of all Ireland, of course. We have innovation parks as well, so I'll show you a video if we can get the technology to work in a few minutes, which is around showcasing of manufacturers' buildings and products within innovation parks in countries around the world. So as I say, we have an office within the DCU Alpha building. It's tenanted out to a number of different companies, so we're pleased to have our name on that little plaque, one of those little plaques on the bottom left-hand corner. We've got a small but perfectly formed office within DCU Alpha. What are we trying to do out of Ireland? Well, we want to have a local presence, but we also want to deliver some of the products, some of the tools that the BRE Group currently delivers. Because of the B word, there's another fiver. We have to conduct our CE marking activity within a European country. So we have set up in Ireland to overcome that issue. We've become accredited by INAB for certification and inspection activity around the construction products regulation, the marine equipment directive and pressure equipment. And we're also planning local test facilities. So at the moment it looks like we're going to secure a test facility just outside the M50 to the north, and we're just going through contractual issues there. But in essence we'll have a big laboratory facility for aspects like fire testing. That would be resistance to fire, sort of big whole wall structures, as well as structural testing as well. So we'll have a sort of an even bigger physical presence within Dublin. Also, my colleagues in the corner, John and his team, are in the processes of developing partnerships, especially around developing an innovation park. We do a lot of training here in Ireland already, and we're looking to roll that out around BIM and BREEAM and ISO as well. Now then, if I can get this video to work, I'll show you the innovation park that we've got in our headquarters in Watford, but we've got others around the world, and we are trying to establish a similar entity here somewhere in Ireland. If you're interested, come and talk to us afterwards, but it's a way of showcasing different types of construction, and certainly the one we've got in Watford, more and more, the technology that's being used on the park is around modular buildings. So fingers crossed we can get this working. I guess I better pause that, otherwise it will scroll round onto the next next video. Right, so as I say, that was the Innovation Park, the one we've got in Watford, and we are in the process of setting that up here in Ireland somewhere. I spoke earlier briefly about the different types of work we are involved in here in Ireland, and as a notified body we will be able to issue CE certification around those 4 areas, construction products being the largest of those areas as we stand. The bit about being a technical assessment body, that means that we can, we also in effect sort of a pseudo standards publication body. We can develop product standards for innovative construction, different products, different systems, for example, that mean there's a mechanism for manufacturers to CE mark their products, their innovative products, where there's not currently an existing harmonised standard. So part of the work we're doing here is involved, or will be involved, around the development of new standards. If you're interested, if you're having difficulty sleeping one night and you want to look at our scope of accreditation, then feel free to click on this link and go through to the INAB scopes. We've just got some exciting news yesterday, funny enough, that we're now accredited also for the inspection activities, so that's the ISO 17020 standard. Also pleased to say that we've got a training partnership with our hosts here today with CITA. This will be for delivering BIM training through our academy. So very pleased to be associated with Alan and his team for that. So let's talk about the BPS. BPS is an acronym for BRE Product Standard. It is a BRE standard, so it's not an EN level or an ISO international level, but it is a BRE standard, and it means we can sort of put in it what we want. The problem in putting what BRE wants into it is a major showstopper, because unless the industry buy into it, we might as well not bother doing it. You know, BRE's view on the world could be very different to all of its stakeholders. But why do we need it? In the UK, there's a huge housing gap, and from the conversations I've had, it's a very similar situation to that of Ireland and Dublin specifically as well, where countries, cities, they need local councils, local authorities, they need quick solutions to solving housing shortages, and modular construction is certainly one way to fill that gap quickly and hopefully cost effectively. The standard has been partly developed through funding that we got from the government as part of a bigger consortium as a means of shortening that housing gap, narrowing that housing gap. But the outcome should be that by manufacturers demonstrating compliance with the standard, it means the specifiers, the end users, are all happy that the modules conform with the standard, they're fit for use, they're nice places to live in, and therefore they can recommend this type of construction for a quick and easy solution to helping solve the housing shortage. One of the big problems, and I've spoken with various colleagues here today, one of the big problems about off-site construction is the negative stereotype that some sectors have. And in order to help overcome that, we need to have a standard that unfortunately goes above and beyond that of just normal, it's as good as conventional building. It's got to almost be better than conventional building methods to help the end users, to help the specifiers overcome any negative stereotype that they may have around modular construction. These are just some clips that I've got out of the press. Essentially, a lot of media pick up on the fact that it's flat pack, and there's a perceived negative connotation around that. In fact, that BBC News article, it wasn't actually, the content of it was actually okay, but it's just the headline makes you start to think, well, actually, off-site construction's no good. Well, actually, I've got a personal, a differing view to that, in that it is very good and it's very effective. There's also a tough UK market. So, I mean, whilst I can talk about the standard and the structural and the building regulations, there's still this thing to overcome, which is around people's perception. And we can partly do that through the standard, but we have to be aware that certainly for the UK is a very conservative, with a small c, market. The house on the left is a modular apartment building in the countries where DAC comes from. There's no hiding the fact that that's a modular building, that it's a timber construction, and you know, quite happy to show that. But the house on the right is a proposed development in the UK, and it's from exactly the same developer, the same manufacturer as the block on the left. But in order to make it suitable and saleable within the UK, they have to change the cosmetics of it. They have to make it look a little bit different, and essentially, and perhaps unfortunately, they have to make it look like a brick and block house, a traditional, conventional house. So there's all this thing around, you know, you've got to serve your local market. What will the local market, the local people that are buying that want to have? My goal through developing this standard is that it shouldn't really matter whether it shouldn't matter to the homeowner that it's a modular building. It should feel nice to be in. It should meet all the regulations. The homeowner shouldn't look at it and think, oh, well, that's a modular building, so I'm not going to want to live in it or be in it. There's also a stereotype that because it's modular, it's a block, it's a cube, and it's a dark and dingy place to live. But one of the purposes of the assessment is that it's makes the places to live a very comfortable and sort of it's high on the well-being agenda. That it's just a really nice place to live. It's got lots of daylighting. You feel comfortable in it. But going back to the original objectives, it's got to comply with the regulations. The difficulty with innovation generally is that people will have to look at it and get through all the red tape. So we're putting mechanisms in place like the construction, like the certification, that will give confidence to third parties that BRE, an independent body, have looked at it, and that the modules comply with certain regulations and the requirements of the standard. Now, Dag, I have to say, I might ask if I can borrow your term here of actors, because I like that your term actors. Stakeholders, unless you get involved stakeholders, then you may as well not develop a standard by yourself, because people won't want to be involved, people haven't been involved, and they won't want to uptake the standard. So Dag, the actors involved in this process are very similar, I'm pleased to say, of the actors that you've had in your previous slides. People need to buy into this at various stages of the chain. You've got to have the mortgage lenders involved, for example, because there's a thing where mortgage lenders will only lend on a two mortgage term length, for example. So is the module, from their point of view, going to withstand 50 or 60 years worth of life and durability? Housing associations, building control have all got a part in the development of our scheme and of our standard. We, in setting this up and getting the general industry buy-in, we've set up various working groups. We've got 6 working groups, which are the sort of the bottom half of that slide. Aspects of fire and structure and the like. But we've also got an overarching technical committee. So the reason for showing you that is that we are getting industry buy-in, and that it is a consensus standard. So it is done by the general consensus in the way that normal standards are developed. It's got to have everyone's buy-in in order to make it a viable and credible standard. And why is it different? Why is it different from anything else that's out there? Well, that's sort of what the standard will look like, but that's kind of makes it look like any other standard. But it is an assessment methodology. It will contain, or it does contain, certain minimum requirements, like building regulation is the minimum requirement. So in the UK, unless you comply with the regulation, the authorities would not let you put the building in place. But the standard goes above and beyond that. It has additional requirements that for which building regulations don't exist. There are a lot of different aspects to the standard, as you can see from that. One of the interesting things there is training. So we're developing training packages around not only the content of the standard, but training in physical terms. So you'll see in a few slides' time that not only are we developing a certification scheme for the end product, for the module, for compliance of the module, but one important aspect is the installation. So we'll be setting up a certification scheme for installers of modular buildings to make sure that when the modules arrive on site, There are trained people there ready to put them in situ and connect to them. It goes back to the financial aspect. If there's any problem with the quality of the product when it arrives on site, then the costings go out the window. But also, if it's not installed properly, that can lead to issues further down the line. The standard tackles at least these minimum requirements from the construction products regulation. So if you were developing a product for CE marking purposes, for example, you would have to consider these 7 essential requirements for construction products. So importantly, our standard looks at all of these aspects as a basic minimum. And a lot of these make sense. You know, the homeowner, the authorities, the mortgage lenders, the insurers, they want to know that the modules are going to be safe as far as structural integrity, that they'll last for 60 years, they're not going to catch fire, and that they're a nice place to live in, for example, and they've got sort of energy and environmental concerns that mean that, you know, you're not having to spend lots of heat energy to be comfortable in the homes. Where the standard goes above and beyond a lot of the other standards and goes above regulation is that we've developed 3-dimensional testing aspects, particularly around structural tests, fire testing and acoustics. So although our standard allows for the use of elements, the 2-dimensional elements, walls, floors, etc., essentially we've developed new methodologies to assess the performance of whole modules, of the 3-dimensional cube, for want of a better term. There's a realisation that structure, fire and acoustics behave differently in the 3-dimensional sense than they do in a 2-dimensional sense. So although you could test, say, a racking test, a stiffness test, for want of a better term, on an element, once you've joined 2 elements together and then eventually made a whole module, the performance of the whole module will behave differently to just a wall or a floor in its own right. And we believe that by doing those extra tests, then it shows an enhanced performance compared to just doing it in a 2-dimensional level. We've also included BIM in there. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but you've seen from the previous presentation how BIM is a very important tool when it comes to modular buildings. But also, fundamentally, from my point of view, the comfort and well-being of the end user, the homeowner, it has to be important, has to be a consideration in all of this, because you can comply with all of those regulations that I've just shown you before, but actually you could still have built a dark, dingy cube to live in. The homeowners won't want to live in there, and so no one's going to buy them. You've seen from some of the slides in the presentations, you can actually, you know, unsurprisingly, have some lovely looking and lovely places to be in by using modular construction. They can be actually really, really nice places to live in. Also, essentially, the standard is agnostic of material type. It can be for steel products, timber frame or concrete panels, for example. It's a methodology, it's an assessment methodology. It doesn't matter what it's made out of. I guess you could make it out of cardboard and you could still try and get it through our standard. So in terms of BIM logging, why is that important? Well, for example, in 10 years' time when I've bought my house and I want to extend it, I might want to know what the construction of the wall is, where all the cabling goes, and bits and pieces that would be essential in not cutting through essential parts or services systems within the buildings. If I want to extend it, then BIM and the like could be a very useful tool to have adopted as part of the standard. Just a quick run through some of the advanced methods that we've incorporated into the standard. We've done a lot of structural testing that's different and above and beyond normal, currently commercially available tests. We've considered, dare I say, the worst case aspects where the installation hasn't been correct. You can see from some of those slides that whereas before it may have been intended to have been supported on all 4 corners, somehow there's been a collapse due to settlement and the like, and then you've got to incorporate tests that compensate for the event that fixings might fail. Also, vertical loading is very important. Certainly in London now there are modular buildings that are going above and beyond 20 stories, for example. So residentially, 5 stories now would be very common. But the point is, just by testing one module on its own, doesn't necessarily show the integrity of when the modules are stacked 20 high. So we've incorporated the 3-dimensional racking and the 3-dimensional structural testing to compensate for and allow for buildings that are going to be fairly tall. The current version of the standard is very much for dwellings, for homes, because that's frankly where the money from the government came from to look at the homes, the shortage in the UK housing market. Future versions will be looking at these sorts of aspects, mirroring the sort of the BREEAM style versions of industrial applications. Our next hits, I think, will be healthcare and education. There's a lot of modular manufacturers that are currently looking at educational buildings and healthcare buildings that are made from off-site construction methods. And so our standard will be easily adoptable from the current dwelling version into healthcare and education. Also, very interestingly, we've spoken earlier about making it relevant to local regulation. And again, the standard is genuinely very easy to transfer into local legislation and local regulation. So complying with the standard is one thing. You can comply with the standard, but BRE is offering third-party certification, so it's voluntary, independent certification to prove that the modules comply with the requirements. The certification scheme looks very much like any sort of commercially available current certification scheme, in as much that it would involve testing. It will involve the manufacturing company to have a management system in place, a certified management system in place, which could be ISO 9001, but it could be a factory production control process. And those two elements combine to make the formal certification scheme. The products will also be listed on the BRE Global site. So we currently have listings for fire and certification of buildings and the like, but we'll also have a listing for the BRE standard, the BPS 7014. And you'll also get a lovely certificate to supply to your end users and specifiers. This will be, in effect, a declaration of performance, very much like the CE marking declarations of performance, in as much that you will declare on that certificate the performance of your individual characteristics of your module. How did it perform for fire? How did it perform for air tightness, for example? And then end users or specifiers can compare one performance of a module to another performance of a different module. Essentially, there will also be ongoing audit testing, so it will be an ongoing surveillance. It's not satisfactory just to comply and then change the design. You have to have designs tested on an ongoing basis and on a random basis, just to prove that independence of the quality. So in the UK, we've got the BOPAS scheme, the Build Off-Site Property Assurance Scheme. What BRE are not looking to do is make people's lives burdensome. We are looking to say, well, actually, if you've already got BOPAS assurance, then we'll consider that. BOPAS assurance, you can see from that slide, contains a lot of elements that the BRE scheme contains. And so we're not asking manufacturers to duplicate the work that they've already done. If you've got fire testing certificates, if you've already got BOPAS assurance, then that's a massive step forward to giving BRE the information so we can apply that to our certification scheme and say, well, actually, look, you've already done 2/3 or whatever of the work that you needed to do. So we're trying to be collaborative, we're not trying to be exclusive. And I think finally it's worth just mentioning from my stint at the helm here that BRE is also involved in the latest of UK construction initiatives, the Construction Innovation Hub. It's a very large 5-year project involving partnerships. I'm going to show you the partners, but essentially the objective there is transforming the performance and productivity for the construction industry. What it doesn't say is that essentially this is going to be focusing strongly on off-site construction, because that's perceived to be the way forward. So it's sort of, dare I say it, throwing conventional methods of construction out of the window and looking at the future of construction industry and how to make homes quicker, easier, more effectively. These are the main partners as it stands, as part of the partnership. We've got the CDBB, the Centre for Digital Built Britain. I get my words twisted with that. It's a partnership between the governmental department there and the Cambridge University. MTC are also one of the main partners, the Manufacturing Technology Centre, and BRE is the lead partner in that, so we're leading on all of that. It's a 5-year project. This is its mission, and as I say, although it does not specifically say off-site construction, I can assure you that although the project going forward has not been fully defined, it's a little bit in a state, because it's very early stages. The off-site sector is fundamentally the focus for this for the initiative. The point there is that there's a web link at the bottom there. I think you're going to be having copies of these slides, so you'll be able to use these links to go on. If you're interested in being part of that CIH forum, then there's still opportunity for you to register your interest and tell us how you'd like to be involved. Thank you very much for listening.